Hello there, I didn't see you there. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, or whatever time period it is whenever you are in the world, and welcome to Chapter 6 of Werewolf the Apocalypse, Heart of the Forest, as I believe we are reaching the end of our Let's Play. Well, tell a lie, I know we're reaching the end because we're on the final chapter, and what a magnificent journey this has been, full of surprises, heartbreaks, and some minor disappointments. Without further ado, let us see how our story concludes in Chapter 6, The Storm. It is one of those blistering summer days when the asphalt melts, the grass withers, and the air smothers those brave enough to step outside. Despite the heat, it felt like the whole village was at a funeral. It was moving. I stood there, surrounded by people whooping over their loss, looking at the rosaries they clutched in their fists. Something tightened in my chest. For a brief, chilling moment, I thought I saw Anya's face among the crowd, but no. I buried her in the barrows myself, and nobody even then knew that she was dead. It was someone else's funeral. Anya was not the reason we gathered in the churchyard. The body of a hunter had been found in the forest. The circumstances of the death were unclear. There'd been more deaths. There'd been even more deaths over the last days where they slipped under the radar. We'd been careful in covering our tracks, and nobody had connected the dots yet. I listened to the funeral hymns, and I thought that for every battle-inspiring song, there was an old lady singing eternal rest in a trembling voice. I could feel the tension seething around me. This death, this funeral had pushed the community, already weary and frightened by the recent disappearance of an activist in the forest, to the edge. The world was watching. The press had swarmed to the funeral like flies. I could hear them squawking about how both sides of the conflict were escalating the situation. The police had cordoned off the funeral and were aggressively searching and detaining any activists they noticed. It had become political. Suddenly the Puszka Białowieża had become politically charged and the hottest place to be in Poland. But it wasn't only local politicians and activists from both sides who'd caught wind of the commotion. The Minister of the Environment himself had driven to the Białowieża to attend the funeral. He was standing next to the priest conducting the ceremony, surrounded by police and what looked like a handful of bodyguards. The coffin went down and the crowd stirred. Everyone started lining up to throw a handful of dust on the coffin on putting the flowers on the grave. Found myself face to face with Bartek. I got swept by the crowd and found myself face to face with Bartek. There should be another coffin here because we both know that she's dead. He looked me in the eyes. I really liked Anya, you know. I froze. It must be hard for you. She was your friend, he said. But don't worry, I'll find out what really happened to her. I said nothing. I didn't know what to say. Bartek looked me in his eyes. Funny thing. It's like all the strange things started happening as soon as you all came here. I looked over his shoulder, at the crowd, and it was clear that many people felt the same way that he did, and the minister knew how to use that sentiment. I listened in disbelief. I watched in disbelief as the priest handed him the mic. Handed him the mic. He wasn't someone who you call a good speaker. He spoke at length about the Polish economy, the importance of the free market and the liberty of the people who to make money from and what God had given them reign over. The earth. Judging by the reactions, it was exactly what the crowd wanted to hear. It was our move. I realized the conflict was only going to escalate, but we had public opinion on our side, and we were about to stand our ground. We were ready to defend ourselves. It was high noon. The sun was at its most merciless and the world was almost white with heat. The air smelled of herbs, bark and tree sap. Insects buzzed lazily in the high grass, stunned by the summer sun. We were ready for war. We lounged in the shadow of the tree, resting after a busy night. We were ready for war. I watched the clearing. I watched the clearing with cold detachment running through the possible scenarios in my head. There were so many of us. People kept coming to the camp asking questions, looking for ways to help. Students, activists, even Greenpeace with banners reading, "Stop logging" and "Respect EU law." The live streaming worked. They'd all seen our live streaming and came here to help. We weren't the only ones in the clearing. A group of local citizens, their banners reading, "Foresters save trees from woodworm" and "Forestry equals jobs," were trying to get the attention of the media. The Pushka was watching us. The Pushka was watching us. Every time a gust of wind was bringing the west smell of the forest to my nostrils, I felt her strong, steadfast presence. She knew that we were doing everything in our power to save her. I thought about my family. For centuries my family served the Pushka, burning villages, hunting down people who dared to hurt her. And now, I was the last Garou of my lineage. What legacy did I want to leave behind? I looked at the harvesters. I looked at the defaced harvesters waiting on the other side of the clearing. Loggers milled around them like ants over a disturbed anthill. The pressure was almost palatable and the tempers were flaring. I looked at my pack. "Everyone knows what to do?" Olga asked, looking at my pack. "I'll keep the security guards occupied," nodded Lisa. "And I'll guard the Pushka's perimeter," growled Daniel. I glanced at the weasels. The weasels were in their positions among the protesters as we agreed. Then left the cops to me. I was ready to fight them. "I'll deal with the cops," I said, "and then we will burn the machines." "That's not the plan," Olga reminded me with a bitter expression. "Keep your eyes on the cops and stay put." The cops were gathering. The cops were gathering in increasing numbers, and I noticed some SWAT teams joining them. Something was up. It was apparent that they were waiting for something. Then it reached boiling point. It reached boiling point where the minister arrived for a photo op. I had a bad feeling about it all. My stomach turned when I saw the black SUVs. I had a bad feeling. I felt my pulse race. He posed and placed the great statesman while the bored journalists took pictures and asked prearranged questions. Just another day in the media circus. In hindsight, you could argue that what happened next set a chain of events into... I'll try that again. In hindsight, you could argue that what happened next set a chain of events in motion and had life-changing consequences for the many. But it started earlier. But it started centuries earlier when the first wolf cubs were stolen and the mourning wolf mother asked my foremothers for help. Everything that happened next, the burning villages, my grandfather escaping to America, my mother running away from my father, my returning to Bielorussia, was a direct consequence. The members of my set had already moved to their positions and I had also had my part to play. The minister was bad news. With him at the scene, everything will get harder, I sighed, pointing at the minister. Olga nodded. We went back to regroup. The activists, humans and werewolves alike listened as we told them what happened. The atmosphere was tense. We started our preparations. We prepared ourselves for the worst case scenario. "Okay, let's move," I heard someone shout. "Move it, people, move it! You know what to do!" And they did. There was a lot of laughter and friendly pushing, chains clinking, and some people darted up the trees to seat themselves on the branches. But I had other plans. Nobody saw me. I was Lupus, the wolf form. I changed and ran to a police van and then hopped on its roof. I waited till they noticed me. I waited till one of the journalists noticed me. She nudged her friend and soon they were all watching, holding their breaths. When all eyes were on me, I gave them the most iconic photo of the protests. I pissed on the car. And then with all the cameras and smartphones filming me, I pissed on the car. It was loud, it smelled, and it seemed to last for an eternity. Then I jumped off the van and darted into the forest. It worked. The talk started there and then. I could see that the minister was an apt politician, that he could smell a deal for himself in it all. But I didn't really care. We'd gotten what we wanted. We started to talk. We started to talk. When the talk started, we weren't alone. After the lime stream, a lot of people had shared their love for the pushka. They were coming to us, asking questions, looking for ways to help. So we started talking, and it became big. I didn't know what tipped the scales in the end. The press, the international attention, the local interests coming together, our passion. The talks weren't easy. Finally, an agreement was within our reach, but the talks weren't easy. The state's forest, the woodworkers, the local population, ecologists, scientists, activists, everyone wanted something. I was by no means an expert, but I wanted to play my part in the recordings. I made sure the talks were fair. So I decided to observe the talks and make sure everything was okay. Both sides wanted to talk, and I wanted to be there to inspire them to play fair. The talks went on and on. Of course, I had my opinions. Everyone at the scene had their own opinion and their own point of view, and I had mine. Let's take the bark beetle. In the middle of it all was, of course, the spruce bark beetle, a dangerous infestation and a convenient excuse for the logging. The beetle had always been a part of the forest ecosystem, pointed out one of the ecologists, but the recent droughts made the spruce more susceptible than ever. The foresters continued. We have to cut down the trees to stop a total disaster. I saw one problem with this approach. The pushka would manage. The pushka would manage as she always had. It was a primordial forest and had its own mechanisms of dealing with infestations. This is how it renewed itself. You fetishize the forest, scoffed one of the officials. People cultivated it for hundreds of years and it cannot survive without our help. He's right. You want to take our forest from us? A group of locals attacked the activists. You're not from here, and you tell us how to live our lives. It was not just a forest. They looked at the pushka as it was another a state-owned commercial forest, but it wasn't. If they have to change their lifestyle to save this unique ecosystem, maybe they should. Opinions clashed, tempers flared, but eventually new constructive ideas started to emerge. At least one of them caught my attention. International observers could help. There was a proposition to form a community of international observers, scientists and foresters, to make sure that the logging was targeting the spruce bark beetle problem only. It was a long and hot day. I rubbed my eyes. I was so tired. I could barely keep them open. My head was spinning. But I kept it going. What was a little heat stroke when I was so much at stake? The talks continued. Of course, they had to make it dramatic. There were cameras, there were lights, and the negotiations lasted all day long. We reached the first draft of an agreement literally at sunset. I had no doubts. They'd only decided to stop the logging because they realized there was something in it for them. I felt relief. But at the moment, I just looked at the sky and laughed. I felt overwhelming relief. And then my exhaustion caught up with me. I found a quiet spot, sank to the ground, and fell asleep. Epilogue. Quiet before the storm. Cheering of the crowd woke me up. It was victory after all. We'd won! The pushka was saved, at least for the time being. People were excited, antsy, full of emotions. If the loggers hadn't left, they probably wouldn't have charged them at all. I was almost disappointed. But to my disappointment, now there was no one to fight, so we parted to blow off steam instead. Soon we were all dancing, talking, singing, and in some cases making out in the shadows. I had to stop someone from making a fire. I mean, for fuck's sake, we were in the middle of a forest during a drought. But my friends didn't join in the festivities. They just sat on the logs, looking at the humans with weary eyes. I joined them. I found my pack. We sat in the shadows, far from the humans. Look at them, murmured Olga. Loud, messy, stupid. Tomorrow this place will look worse than if we'd let them do the logging. What a killjoy! They have the right to celebrate, I said, and I'd rather that they were celebrating the end of the logging than destroying the forest. Their celebration is meaningless. They would wound Guy even if they tried to help her. Olga looked at them for some time. Well, maybe with time they'll turn this energy into something more useful. We'll have to wait and see. I wasn't so sure. I wasn't sure if I shared her optimism. Time would tell who was right. We gathered in the clearing in which I'd first woken up as a Garou. Lisa stood in the middle of the clearing, the wolf and the weasel circling her, each other cautiously. Now, she said, looking at Cornell and Olga, you two, you need to solve this. Today. Olga nodded. There was determination in her eyes. I didn't always agree with you, Cornell, she said, but we could use your skills right now. That night, we fought. The rift that divided our sept proved inconsolable. Cornell looked defeated. There was no hope in Cornell's grey eyes. They weren't piercing now, but ashen. Something had died in his soul that night, and it would never come back. It was clear that Olga was our leader now, for better or for worse. No one dared to defy her. No one dared to defy the Black Fury and her sacred mission. Lisa and our patrons made sure that we did right by Garou law and the sept matters were resolved. But more happened that summer. But it didn't cover everything that had happened that summer, though some consequences would have to unravel with time. Daniel introduced me to the wolves. Later, Daniel introduced me to the wild wolf packs living in the forest. We would spend a lot of time with them searching for the lost Garou cubs we hoped were out there. Bartek was alive. Despite everything that had happened, Bartek managed to see another day. The battle for the forest had sown the seeds of radicalism in the local community, and Bartek was no exception. His father was on the side of the enemy, and with the influence he had over Bartek, I had the feeling they would both die at my hand one day. But it was all still ahead of me. For now, the first chapter of my new life was coming to an end. I'd come here to learn about my roots. I dug my hands deeper into my pockets. My family had fought the humans who invaded the forest for generations, and now there I was, making pacts of non-aggression with the loggers. Was I a traitor, or was I the one who'd finally got it right? Your story is almost over. This might be a good time to take a look at that character sheet. That wasn't quite the right wording, but you get what I'm trying to say. If you want to pause this video and take screenshots, because I know some people are doing that online on Twitter, go ahead, knock yourself out. I couldn't give two shits. And back up again, a little bit quicker. Noise. The clearing was empty and full of sunlight. The harvesters were gone, leaving the scars of their tracks behind. People were cleaning up the campsite, making plans to turn the temporary protest site into a permanent tent town. Took a deep breath. The air was sweet and smelled of coming rain. The upturned soil smelled of turf and the sweet aroma of decay. There would be a storm later that day. I could feel it. A faint, sharp layer of electricity surrounded the wetness. I smiled. I liked my new sense of smell. This is not the end, said the ash-grey wolf. I assume you know that. I sighed. Of course I knew. I was just a momentary break, a truce that both sides knew needed to regroup and reinforce. Yeah, I know, I sighed, looking around. I had something else in my mind. There was a squirrel somewhere. I could smell it. I wanted to chase it, to run, to feel the thrill of adrenaline rushing through my veins, but I couldn't spot it. It mocked me from the branches above, squeaking curses in its squirrel tongue. I couldn't see it, but I ran away. Anyway, I was Lupus, the wolf form, and so I ran just for the thrill of it. You have finished Heart of the Forest. Cubs gather around the fire and listen to the story of Maia Borodich, known among the Garou as Enigma of the Black Furies, Galliard of the Morning Wolf Mother Pack. She sang songs of wisdom. Maia managed to negotiate a fragile peace and stop the harvesters, but would it hold? The first protest against the logging of the Bilovizia forest took place in 2016. The game was loosely inspired by those events. All characters and events depicted in this game are entirely fictitious. And there we have it, family! We have reached the end of Werewolf the Apocalypse, Heart of the Forest. And what a fantastic game this is! Woo! If you haven't played this game yet, I really advise you to go and grab it on Steam or GOG.com or whatever platforms it's available on. I would give you a breakdown of my thoughts and opinions on it now. However, I already did a review of that, which you could check in the description below. And I'm going to end things here, and you could just listen to this song and watch the credits fly by. And until next time, family, farewell.
Я терпел, я отрывал, я шагу подставлял и воссиял по борьбе, бот шаги.